Our next speaker is Yaa Kumah-Crystal, Dr. Yaa. And I've had the pleasure of getting to know Dr. Yaa over the last couple of weeks, and already we've collaborated on a submission to AMIA, another fascinating project around humor in GPT models that have been swapping emails back and forth. She's an energetic researcher, MPH and master's, assistant professor in Department of Biomedical Informatics, and also assistant professor in Department of Pediatric Oncology. Endocrinology. Dr. Yaa, thank you so much, and thank you for sharing the other side of AI, the one that we're seeing much more frequently now, which is related to generative models. Thank you, Dr. Yaa.
Thank you so much for having me. And Jesse was kind when he said that I've been emailing him. I've been bothering him nonstop, and he's been so gracious. And just answering all my questions and explaining things in a way that I can translate back to my colleagues. I'm thrilled to be here. As Jesse said, I am a pediatric endocrinologist, which means I take care of kids with different conditions, mostly to do with diabetes, hormone problems. I also have the privilege of working in health IT to look at emerging technologies and how we can use them to improve the delivery of care. So I'm one of the providers at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and I've been here for, thank you so much. Short. I've been here for almost 20 years now here at Vanderbilt, and I've learned so much along the way about how the patients and the providers can collaborate with each other to improve the way we're taking care of patients in general. I think in November, as much of you, I took recognition of this new fancy tool everyone's talking about called Chat GPT. And since I learned about it, I've been talking about it nonstop and wanting to delve more into the details to figure out how this can help us better take care of patients. In my mind, this is the second coming of the wheel. This is really just going to revolutionize the way we interact with data. And from a health point of view, a lot of our data is in the electronic health record. So what's the electronic health record? Well, when you go see your doctor, instead of paying attention to you and asking about your conditions, they're typing on computer because they have to get everything you say into the chart, because that's where our source of truth is. That's where we go to review your information. That's where we go to share notes with each other and review your labs, etc. But all that information is in there, some structured like labs, some unstructured like our notes, but getting the information back out of there can be just a pain. And not only is it a pain, but the EHR has had some usability issues, making it frustrating to dig through notes. So things are missed sometimes because there's not kind of the bird's eye view of everything. It's, you need to make sure you clicked on that specific radiology encounter. You need to make sure that you review that particular cardiologist note to have the full picture. What's been really exciting about these models is that this is an opportunity for us to leverage the tools to really bring things together and get this bird's eye view to take care of patients. I'm going to talk through just some general use cases for research in general, and then more specifically for patient care that you might find useful in terms of your own pursuits. General overview, I think most of us are well versed in terms of what these tools are and where they came from, but ChatGPT, as Jesse said, this has more or less become the Kleenex term, but large language models in general, they're trained on a massive amount of data, and they can generate human-like text, which is great and amazing because starting in November, this is Google Trends data for the past year, looking at the word Chat GPT. And you can see here this kind of inflection point where things skyrocketed. This right here is fine because this was, I think, like November 27th or something. So like after Thanksgiving, people took like a break to like, eat their turkey and watch football. Then it revved right back up again. And this is in comparison with COVID. So as you can see, interests are really trending up. And fortunately, I think some of the craziness around COVID, as we are learning more and learning how to better care for the population, is starting to die down. And hopefully the convergence is that we're using these tools also to educate ourselves how to communicate with patients and how to better come to consensus about care. But this is not just a blip. This is something that I think if we pay enough attention to, really has the potential to change the way we work. this is disruptive technology, and the kind of metaphor I like to give. If you guys are old enough, I think most of you are, Napster. Do you guys remember Napster? I don't tell anyone, but I was a big fan of Napster. It was really just changed the way that you could engage, interact, and get music. And by virtue of that, change the music industry altogether. So no one's going to point to Napster and be like, oh, that was, and it's kind of janky, it crashed sometimes and it didn't work. But looking down the line at where we got to from that, I think this is where we are right now. And all the limitations that, people point to, like, it's okay, but, who's late some time. This is just the beginning. Like like AOL, like, wow, you could, dial in, you had that little sound, and then you were in there, you're like, and I think what's important is people in this room are people who see systems that don't quite exist yet. And you can kind of see on the horizon and say, like, I get it. Like, there's something going on here and we need to pay attention. So keep paying attention and keep thinking through how we're going to be pushing these tools to the next level and, get the next TikTok because Napster existed. All right, so one of the questions that often comes up is like, why is GPT so hard to say? And this is just a demonstration of like, why this technology is useful, because you can ask it anything. So I oftentimes when I'm like, interacting and trying to do a demonstration, we just like end up saying chat GTP. And I hear a lot of people saying that also, just like fumbling on the words. And I was like, well, why is it so hard to say? And the answer I gave me back was very reasonable. It says, well, the words G and P, when you say them, you like push with the back of the mouth, whereas T is like, it's more in the front of your mouth. So GTP just sounds more natural because those letters kind of cluster together. But GPT, it can fumble on those words sometimes. So don't feel bad if you find yourself fumbling, because I do it all the time. But this is just an example to say, like, this gets you answers. If I were to Google search this information, I would get 5 ads, and then maybe some articles that talk about this and some articles that talk about articulation, and maybe a really useful Reddit post where someone out there answered my exact question, but maybe not. And that's what's interesting about these tools. So how does it work? Again, I think many of you guys have heard Jesse's talks before, but when I give these presentations to my colleagues, what I try to explain is that this is kind of like fancy auto-suggest. So I have 2 boys, 6 and 11, and we often play with this game on my phone or iPad where we have a Google keyboard, and you just start to type the next word that comes through. So I'll just keep playing here. And okay, I want to pay attention to this one. So it just comes up with words, and then it says, can you give me trivia questions to update and like, it doesn't make sense, but you just kind of figure out what it's going to say next and come up with this ridiculous sentence, and you just giggle about it. But what was cool here in this example, as I was doing the screen recording, this was completely random. It's Judy Garland. So why? Like, because that makes sense, right? When you say Judy, if I gave you Judy, the next word that kind of makes sense based on, the cumulative data of the world would be Garland. And this is more or less what these tools are doing. They're thinking, I'm gonna do this. And we all do this because as humans, that's what we do. We try to make sense in the context of how we understand things, but they're not sentient ellipses yet. But that's what these tools are doing. And as Jesse will describe, the reason ChatGPT is interesting is not that it only thinks of the next word or predicts the next kind of thought sequence, but will do it in such a way where it can now answer a question that you give it. So use case examples for health and research, just explaining things. So oftentimes when we're doing research, trying to better understand anything that's going on, trying to understand use cases like chimerism. This was a wonderful presentation, and rarely I get to have an opportunity to have a speaker that uses great metaphors and great kind of storytelling, like, Alice in Wonderland and the turtle and the hare, to really explain things. Oftentimes, some of the scientific presentations I go to at my conferences, I'm struggling a little bit. But you can go to PubMed or Google Scholar, find an article that you think you need to understand to move your own research to the next level. And you can like just throw into ChatGPT and type in EL5, because that in Reddit terms means explain it to me like I'm 5. And it will break it down to just simple terms and break down the core concepts and deliver it in such a way that it will be more understandable. And you can delve more into the details as well. You can say, well, what does that mean? Explain to me more. Another similar use case like Explain 5 is getting explanations in general, a real life use case that we were talking about at home. And I'm going to apologize. I use my kids as examples for everything just because I get a lot of good examples from them. And they have so many interesting questions in the way they're understanding the world because they're so young still, that it makes me think, I think, a little more abstract than I would otherwise, just thinking through how I interact with adults. But we were talking about a particular movie, one of the new Spider-Verse movies. And we're like, oh, we want to figure out what happened in that one. And then we had to think about one of the old adventure movies, which we hadn't seen yet, but we had, Disney Plus, we're going to watch it. I was like, what's the story about? I'm like, well, we can go to Wikipedia, but that gives the whole plot synopsis. We're like, we don't want that. We're like, well, let's ask ChatGPT. So we're like, ChatGPT, can you summarize this movie without spoilers? And it did. It gave us this is what it's about. This is what's going on. And it didn't, it didn't ruin it. We were engaged. We were excited. We found a way to watch the movie. So things like that, but that it can understand what you're referring to when you're asking it to deliver information. So not just break down information for you, but deliver it in a way that's actually useful to what you're trying to solve. So asset reliability in education. Like I said, I have two kids, 6 and 11, and they're growing learners. So I teach a class in informatics, the Masters of Applied Informatics, where physicians and other people who are interested in applying technology to care, we learn about different concepts like different codes and taxonomies in medicine and smart on fire applications that you can integrate. So I work with adult learners. These people are in a class. They've enrolled in the class. They sought out the class. So they're here to learn. They're ready to learn. They've developed their voice and tone and style of thinking. Whereas kids, they're still on the pathway to becoming full-form learners, but they're not quite there yet. So there's a lot of great discussion, I think even later today, about how these tools are going to be incorporated in education and what we need to be thinking about, how we need to be mindful about how and when to introduce them. As you can imagine, I play with these with my kids all the time, and they know how to use, they know how to play with it. A lot of the things we do is play, but just to understand what the limitations are, because they need to understand that also. That when the time comes, when they're in the job market, and I'm looking at two candidates, and one of them wrote their, resume or their cover letter. One of them spent 5 hours writing their cover letter, getting it just right. The other one churned out a cover letter in 5 minutes using ChatGPT. I'm like, well, I feel like the one who wrote in 5 minutes was more efficient. Maybe that's the person I want working in my lab. So it's considerations like that, and what we need to think through about preparing our young learners for the future that is tomorrow. And at the same time, being very conscious that there's still skills you need to learn before you can go on autopilot. So you need to kind of learn the rule, literally the rules of the road. When my 12-year-old starts driving, God help us all, I'm going to want him to be able to use kind of the full features, want him to learn how to anticipate things that might be coming out of the drive. If we ever get full driving self cars, I feel like I want him to know how to drive first before we engage full self-driving. But maybe if we're at the point where 90% of the cars are full self-driving, that's not going to be so much of a concern. So I think these are important conversations to have. And I think we found a nice middle ground with calculators. My first grader, we're doing math. We learn math facts. He's learning his times tables. And well, first of all, they changed math, so I'm learning math too. But we're not playing with calculators. But my 6th grader, yeah, we are. And he's using it in such a way to understand more complex topics because he knows how to do long divisions because he has to learn that. But if he really needs to do long division, when I need to do taxes, I'm not going to do long division. It's not a good idea. I'm going to use a calculator. And these are tools that allow us to do more. So ideation. One of the really neat things that I use these tools for in research is coming up with more ideas and coming up with different ideas and different approaches. And as Jesse discusses in kind of his prompt education courses, what did I miss? So you can actually ask these tools to rubber duck. So the concept of rubber ducking is bouncing ideas off of to try to arrive at a different place. This is something that, writers and authors do a lot, where you're just kind of talking to an animate object, say like, well, what about this? What about this? What about that? And by thinking out loud, you're able to arrive at a new idea. Well, you're not thinking out loud by yourself anymore. So that's interesting. And how can these tools help you arrive at a new place? I think my husband's grateful now I have someone else to bounce an idea off of besides him, because he used to be my rubber duck. Oh, also what I wanted to show you was this useful Google extension that's a ChatGPT extension. So you can actually enter your search in Google and get the Google result and the ChatGPT result. So I answered here, again, like, what is the concept of soundboarding and AI rubber ducking? And it's like, how to rubber duck and like what rubber duck debugging. And then ChatGPT is like, this is what rubber ducking is. Again, answers versus ideas, which is not to say that there's no place for links and searching and the journey. Because sometimes, like that Alice in Wonderland example, you find yourself going down a rabbit hole, and a fascinating rabbit hole, and you learn things you never thought you wanted to know. So sometimes, exploring different concepts and having to forage is not a bad thing. And I think we still need to teach to that. But sometimes when you know what you want, it's useful to get what you want. And is there a way we can design these tools where they give you the answers you want, but also still present information that can help take you down those different rabbit holes? Because the act of discovery is still important. So research ideation. So this is just an example. As an endocrinologist, I think about patients with diabetes and different ways to manage them. So I asked, I hope this is big enough. I don't think it is, but what are different ways that I can manage a patient with diabetes or thyroid disease? And then it gave me all these things, and I was like, oh, that sounds pretty good. So I'm like, I think I don't know that we're structured to investigate a problem like that, but I can think of a collaborator at Stanford that I could call tomorrow to try to think through this problem. So it's pretty amazing in terms of how it can help you consider other things and other approaches. And I think most of the time, I don't even take exactly what it said, but it helped me arrive at something I might not otherwise arrive at without having this prompt. So this is another example of ChatGPT versus Bing Sydney. So Sydney is Bing similar GTP for, GPT for architecture. But what's useful is that it will provide you links and context and additional information to that. One of the things that I think is interesting about what we need from these tools from a health perspective, OpenAI and Microsoft, I think, are very reasonable in not wanting to pose information in a way that could potentially be dangerous. So I often try to challenge it and ask it kind of medical information recommendations. And I'll be like, I am not a doctor. Like, you should talk to your doctor about this. But sometimes doctors need some guidance also. ChatGPT will disclaim, but still give you information. But Bing at this time, reasonably, because they have stakes, will not. So what is it we can do with these tools so that your doctor can get some useful information? Because sometimes I want to know, like, well, what's the oral to IV conversion for this particular medication? Right now, I phone a friend, I call my pharmacist, and they're like, and they go look it up on the computer and they tell it back to me. But I feel like that could be more efficient. Categorization. So I think as most of you who do any kind of research, sometimes you need to understand information, group it and sort it and think through how these things fit together and how one of these things is not like the other. I found this tool very, very interesting and helpful for that. This is just a silly example I gave, just species of cats, dogs, and horses, and it did a really good job. And it makes sense that it would do a really good job, right? Because if anything, in the very beginning, we talked about how these tools were meant for categorization, classification, like dog versus cat. And literally, this is what it's able to help you do. One of the things that we were doing was trying to understand patient messages that they sent to us asking for different kind of medical requests and how to better categorize them. Well, we have a schema that exists that actually has categories for different patient messages, whether this is a medical request or information, seeking information about a symptom, et cetera. Knowing that information, we can actually intelligently triage messages to the right person to answer them. If something's about a referral, I can need another appointment, that goes to the clinic administrator, versus if something's a symptoms, I have a headache, that goes to the doctor, versus if something's an urgent request, I have a headache and the left side of my face is numb, that gets marked as urgent. So how can we use these tools to help? Because everything right now ends up in the same basket. And you are, like your email, you were sorting, you were looking through, and you're like, oh my gosh, this was important. I wish that had been escalated sooner. and how can we use these tools to help us with those categorizations to help care for our patients better. And tables, this was a fun thing that I found out, that it can help make tables for you. So you can give it your data, you can give it your information, you can give it your descriptive statistics and say like, here is some information about patients that I've seen. Can you categorize this for me and present in a table format? And it's a good table format. And you can like literally copy that table and like put it in a Word document and it looks good. You can ask it for to make it comma separated. And that way you can, put it in Excel or whatever. But I'm very impressed with the kinds of things it's able to do to help you kind of dissect and maneuver through your research information. I've been following a lot about Sam Altman. He's one of the leaders in the area and with OpenAI specifically. And he has some interesting perspectives about what these tools are right now and what they're supposed to be. He is very interested in the concept of artificial general intelligence and getting to the point where these tools are able to think through and come up with ideas and ideation above and beyond what we're able to do. And that's a whole nother discussion. But he very much will tell you, like right now, these tools have limitations and they give misleading impressions of greatness, which is to say, I'm just like constantly in awe, but you have to know more than it knows to know where it falls short. So for example, this concept of hallucinations, which again is another kind of like anthropomorphic term, but it's become the general term that we all accept here. In medicine, there's a similar term called confabulation. There's a symptom called Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, where someone has like thiamine deficiency, and they just kind of invent or create stories, and it makes a lot of sense then. They believe what they're saying is true, but you're just like, I don't think that ever happened, but they'll say it with such authority, which is akin to what we think is going on here. But as Jesse will tell you, these hallucinations, so this I asked it to give me the differential diagnosis of a patient with polyuria, which means that they're having like a lot of urination. And it gave me a great list of like diabetes, insipidus, mellitus, hypercalcemia. And number 12 is SIADH. That's the symptom of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone secretion. So what's interesting about that one, if you can break down the words, symptom of inappropriate antidiuretic hormone secretion. So antidiuretic hormone is antidiuretic. It makes you not pee. That's actually the exact opposite of what is going on there. But it falls into this category of like, well, what's the issue there? Because when you have like diabetes insipidus, if anything, you have an issue of too much. I'm sorry, you have an issue of you don't have enough ADH. And SIADH is the opposite of that. So I get why it did that, but this is not the right answer. But if you know more than that, you're like, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. But if you're, a resident and you're rotating on endocrinology the first day and you're like, well, my diagnosis is da 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 da, you might be like, oh, I'm not sure about that. And you might question whether you've done your due diligence. But these hallucinations, it's doing exactly what you asked it to do. This is a feature, not a bug. It's literally Judy Garland. It's inferring what makes sense and it's presenting that information to you. So as long as you can come in it with that understanding and critically analyze the information, then you're safe to use these tools. But how can we take this a level further than that? Because we would like it to be trustworthy. I would like to be able to use it as a learner, as someone who's new to the space, to get actual accurate information. And what's cool about what's evolving in the space is the concept of these like plugins and the ability to kind of review and critique its information and tell you something back. So what if I could feed this information to ChatGPT, point it to known data sources for polyuria, polydipsia, et cetera, and say like, review this and like actually just give me the information based on that that's actually representative in this article. Because you know what? We have a lot of existing information in medicine about conditions and how to treat them, how to manage them. It's just, they're all free text. You have to like read all these articles. You have to like go to PubMed, you have to go to primary literature. It's all there, but it's not easily categorized and captured and consumable. And this is what this gives us, something that is consumable and answers the question. It doesn't give you a bunch of links. it answers the question for you. And we actually have techniques and tools that are emerging that can actually give you more precise and accurate answers and overcome some of the limitations that exist right now. So another example of how it can be usefully wrong. I think a common thing you'll see is about how it kind of makes up references and will tell you this author wrote this thing about this thing. And again, doing what's supposed to do. If this is not a bug, it's a feature. What you can do from that is, so I asked it for some references about a study I was doing about glucose. And it gave me this reference and I was like, well, let's see about that. So I went to Google Scholar and I was like, well, how accurate is that information that it gave me? And I pasted the reference right in Google Scholar. Pause for dramatic effect. Oh, and I was like, nope, I'm sorry. This reference does not exist. I'm like, okay, fine. That reference does exist, but ChatGPT seems to think that I need to know something about that. So what if I take the title of the reference, I get rid of, the specifics about the author and all that stuff, and I search for that information. And you know what? I got some really useful things back. And it's about understanding the shortcomings and leveraging the shortcomings to accomplish something new and different. With the new tools like Bing, those will actually work to give you more accurate references. There's one I just read about that literally is about providing accurate references. And so much new industry is emerging from the foundation of what these things are able to do and from identifying the shortcomings of what these things are able to do. There's a lot of concern about jobs and things that are going to become obsolete because of these new tools. But a lot of things are just coming about because they exist now. What the balance is going to be and how it's going to shake out ultimately, I think is still left to be seen. But I think that's very interesting. Keep me honest about the time because I get to talk about this stuff. All right. So I'll just hop into math woes. I think everybody is aware about, these things are not that great at math. They're language models. That's okay. You guys are fine. It's fine. I got perhaps a screenshot with a January 30th update. It's like, we're better at math. Still not great at math. Do not do your taxes with ChatGPT. So I'd asked it, so give me some random numbers. And I'm like, what's the sum of those numbers? And I was like, 127. I'm like, about close, right? Because, in my head, I'm like summing those up. So I took that, I took like the exact thing and I summed it up. And I'm like, hey, Google knows how to do math. It's like, that's 129. I was like, ooh, kind of missed the mark there. But again, it's not here to do math for you guys. Like that's okay. But what if, here's what Google can't do. If I said sum these numbers, Google's like, here's how you find a sum. This is a calculator. This understands language. So I can tell ChatGPT to sum these numbers, and ChatGPT understands the concept of summing these numbers. So what if, once it understands that I'm asking it to do math, it can hand me off gracefully to something that can actually do math for me? These tools are emerging, these tools are existing, these things are coming about because people are identifying these, not even limitations, that's what it's supposed to do, but they're being creative about it. I'm going to hop ahead to one of my last slides, because again, I could talk for years. Here, so let's go. Now I want to slideshow. I had to add this in here because we were talking, about mirrors and chimerism, and just like the future of medicine. I grew up watching a lot of Star Trek, and this is what I wanted to be. And like, where's medicine going? Well, I think we're going to be okay, guys, because there's still doctors in the future, at least according to Star Trek. And I think I'll leave it there. If anyone wants to, chat with me about this stuff, again, I can talk off your ear for hours. The one slide that I had that I wanted to try to speak to, see if I can get it back. So there was, when Deep Blue beat the world's best chess player, there was a lot of just discussion about, well, humans are doomed. Like that's the end of chess. That's the end of every kind of creativity. The computers are taken over. The other day, I caught my son, 11, playing chess on his, he wasn't even playing chess. He was watching his friends play chess on his computer on Discord. I'm like, what is this? And he was like, I'm just watching them play chess. I'm like, do you play? He's like, well, sometimes. But people don't want to watch computers play chess. They want to watch people play chess because we care about what people are able to do. Just because an AI can draw a picture doesn't mean I'm not still amazed when I see someone drawing something that I can't. So I think we're going to be okay, guys. I think these tools are really going to augment what we're able to do and take us to places that we haven't before. So I'm really excited to be on this journey with everyone.